2D transforms in CSS. Now, this is a topic which complements transitions and helps us to move easily into animations. Let's find out how that works. Now, here is a document I created with some elements inside of it. I have a heading, a div which contains some text in it, and a large green div with two divs inside of it, and another two elements which have some text inside of it. Let's check out one by one. So the very first item which I've created is a heading, which is having the text 2D transforms inside of it. Let's see how a transformation on text, a simple transformation can help. So with the very first one which I've created is known as rise text, and the rise text transformation is basically just a class name I've given, and that class name has been applied to this particular um, heading over here. And in this class, I am setting the property that is transform rotate. And as soon as I do that, the entire text rotates as it is without having to change the angle of every alphabet, but it changes the angle of the entire word together as if it was written on a blank and you held a blank in a particular angle. So in this case, it has been taken into negative 15 degrees, which is going to tilt it backwards, and at the end of it, it is going to be tilted upwards, making it look as if it's ascending towards the upward direction. Now, if in this case, I've also applied a bottom margin, which if not applied, is going to create a spacing issue that is it is going to overlap on the next component, which explains us the original position of this element is maintained, where you see this top half over here, the bottom of this S, this little square, this is where the actual line where the original heading exists. Now, the problem is when you transform it in a particular order, it tilts itself but it does not leave the position that it was consuming. Therefore, we have that overlapping the next element. That's how it used. Now, this property can be used for styling where you want it deliberately to overlap on the next component. Maybe it's part of your look and feel. Maybe you're designing something which is to replicate a magazine cover or something like that. Now, in this case, you also have a 2D transform over here, which I am going to apply. But before that, let's also restore the margin. So all my components are visible separately. Now, after giving rotation, I have set it the margin. Now this box has moved down. Now let's also play around with this box. Now this div which I created that has this text CSS inside of it, it's a simple div and I've given it a class name known as spin box. Now, the spin box div has a finite width, which is fit content, meaning it will only have width enough to fit the text inside of it. And I've given it a padding of 25 pixels. That way it appears to be a little beefed up. It's not sticking to the content only. And I've also given it a background color, a border radius of 15 pixels, which makes it have rounded edges. And I've set a property known as transition all 4 seconds. The reason for that is because I'm about to transit a property in it. That is, I'm going to set it with a new transformation on hover. So the hover pseudo class is defined right here. The moment I give it a hover, whenever I hover, it is supposed to transform in such a way that it will rotate for 320 degrees. Now remember, we performed the rotation before. Let's see how it works here. And as you can see, the rotation happens with the center uh, vortex of the element. So it is not rotating on a particular side itself. Okay, it is rotating properly. This is the fun part of it. You can have spinning items or spinners created by yourself. You know those little icons which appear when you're loading your screen. You can have one of those. This can be used for some larger animations. Now, similar to that, I've created this container which has a minimum top margin of 50 pixels, hence this gap between these two items. A background color, given it a finite height of 250 pixels. And I've set it to display flex, so I'm able to easily center the items inside it. So the red and the blue div over here are centered because its parent, that is this dot container div, has been set to as display flex. Let's look at the HTML code over here. We have the container, and inside of container we have two divs. One is called movex, the other is called bot. Bot as in bottom. So let's look at the style which I was assigned to MoveX. Now, MoveX has been given this background color, solid border, a fixed height and width, and I've set transformation as the transition, and I've given it 2 seconds of transition for any transformations that happen. On hover, I've translated its transformation. So translate basically means move, and I've moved it on the y-axis. Whenever you're doing a 2D transform and you're translating in a two-dimensional plane, you have to move on x and y axis. So the first argument in this translate is basically the x-axis, and the second one is y-axis. Let's see how this works. So as soon as I move it over here, automatically when I hover, it moves down. This can be used for creating, effects like opening of envelopes, opening, closing of windows, or even menu bars popping in when you hover over a button, etc. That's 2D transformation with translate feature. Translate means movement. Now, if I change this property from 0 pixels to, let's say, 50 pixels, it is going to move diagonally because I have also given its x-axis path to move. I can try the same thing out by setting 0 pixels to my y-axis, and you can see it moves in a straight line on the x-plane. Let's restore it to what we had before. Now the next one is known as bot, and the bottom div is basically just a simple background color aqua and a border red dash border box which I've created, and I've added some text inside of it so that we're able to see what really happens when I transform it. Again, the same transition has been set to transform property, and it's a forward state. I have set a transform property to scale. Scale, the word itself is self-explanatory. That is, you're scaling it to a certain degree, and you can see the moment I hover over it, it is scaling. And again, it is X and Y scaling. Over here, I have set a scale to 2 and 3. That's why the square transforms into a rectangle. So X-axis scaling, if I set it equivalent to Y-axis scaling, make sure when I'm setting it to scale 1 times or 2 times or 3 times, it is looking this huge. So if you add another 0 over here, that's going to become humongous. Yeah. But and this also can be used as a loading animation, that you have some sort of feature which is loaded in, and once it's loaded and you want it to burst out and then fade away, something of that sort can be easily done. Okay. So the next feature in line is skew. Skew is something which is very simple. Okay. Skew, those who don't understand what skew means is basically translating or transforming a particular shape in such a way that it is stretched on the diagonal basis. You will get to understand what it means. So diagonally stretching is known as skewing. Now, the next item which I added is a div which contains this text. Skew this text. Please do not misread it. It means skew this text. And it has this class called skew. So I've set a skew class, which has again the transform property set for transition, given it a finite width, finite height, background color, border color, and a margin. So there's a separation space somewhere. Okay. So let's see what happens on hover. I've set a skew property of hover, and in skew property, I've set two angles of skew. As you can see, it gets skewed by certain degrees on one side, one axis, and on certain degree to the other. This is getting diagonally stretched in a way. Let's say we only skew it on the x plane. This is what happens. Let's skew it only on the y plane by setting 0 degree skewing, and this is what happens. So it's going to move only the parallel lines. If you skew only one thing, that is x or y. So if you're skewed y, it's going to move the standing vertical lines. If it is the x-axis where you set some degrees, it's going to only do that. When you set both of these, it is going to, of course, translate on both the parallel pairs. Okay. You need to try this out more often to understand how it works. This feature is also available in MS Paint to skew the diagrams which you have created, and every drawing software that has been used since you have used it. You can check it out yourself to understand skewing much better. Similarly, last but not least, we have the feature known as matrix. Now, what matrix does is matrix allows us to apply multiple styles in one. So if you want to have multiple transitions in one declaration instead of having multi-line declarations, whether to skew it, to rotate it, and you want to maybe skew, rotate, and also translate it at the same time, all of that can be defined and done all together. So over here, you have to define this transform as a matrix. And in the matrix method, you have to provide the x, scale y, skew x, skew y property in line. And that's how it works. So you can have multiple items put in together. This is something which you only can get through practice. And if defining it over here is difficult, you can simply go to inspect, Let me turn this into full screen. Yeah. You can always go to inspect, and inside inspect, you can force it for the hover state, which basically shows you the hover over here now, because I have set the property of a hover. If you're not set it for hover, it will be available directly. And right here, you can play around with the settings to see the direct impact. See, when I'm moving it on X and Y axis, it also transfers directly. So that's how skewing works. That's how transitions work, 2D transformations work on CSS. Yes, here are the list of all 2D transformation methods that you can use. In this case, you have the matrix method, the translate XY method. So you can choose only to translate on one axis instead of having to define both axes, because it's really stupid to have defined one axis and keeping the other as zero when you don't need it. So you can use translate X and translate Y, or it's a matter of your choice and ease of typing it. Same applies for skew X and skew Y, scale X and scale Y. Rotation, of course, is only a one argument, that is the angle at which it should rotate. So it takes on only one argument. That's it for 2D transforms. See you next in the 3D transformations.